Hello everyone! It's time for another emergency video. Let's go over the timeline of the nightmare of my life, shall we? A couple of months ago, I started work on an animation in which I wanted to concentrate on learning how to animate frame to frame a little bit better than not at all, rather than relying simply on tweening, because I, quote-unquote, finally had the time. Not much later, Matt asked for a series of videos for a project to be released in May or June. I finished most of these in May, and I made another one in early June. I, again foolishly, decided to go back to my frame-to-frame animation in my spare time, as I finish off a lot of side projects that month. You know, because I have the time. Oh, Pastila, you special man. The videos I made for Matt haven't come up on their docket yet, so I can't release them for this month either. Which means I had to move up other projects from 2 months from now to right fucking now. By the way, this isn't Matt's fault, to be clear. It's the fault of Pastila, who cannot defend himself anyway. The perfect crime. Time to lay out the blame on Wooly somehow. Like a million months ago when Mortal Kombat 5 came out, he wondered to me about a Trifusion of Kotal Kahn from Mortal Kombat, some weirdo named Ogre from an obscure fighter named Tekken or something, and an angry ball of green and orange slave anklets, Blanka. He's from a game series called Alleyway Strikers. I don't know much about fighting games. I asked him again this month if he was still interested. The response was overwhelming. So, without further ado, let's draw some big sweaty men. Oh, I never get tired of making those terrible openings. Alright, this time in my little live part of the commentary, which I'm going to start early because I need to concentrate on just flying through these as quickly as possible for this month. There will be 4 of these, just like all my other Trifusion things. I've only done, what, 2 series? Yeah, 2 series. Anyways, I want to do something a little bit different in which I just go through very quickly and identify all the little elements of all these different characters that we're going to be looking at for this video and all future videos. Firstly, let's take a look at Blanka. Blanka, he's had quite a few variations over the years, of course. Some of them concentrate more on him kind of just being a big ball of anger. Other ones concentrate a bit more on him being very wild, feral looking, kind of monkeyish arms, elongating, all this nonsense. But he always has very common elements too. Big chest of sexy, tough pubic hair. I don't know what's going on there. And of course, his big, manly man-mane of spiky hair that makes no sense at all. Oh, Blanka, we love you and your slave anklets. I don't understand that. Is this semen? Is he clawing semen? He's probably... Yeah, that's probably what's happening. Anyways, the gist of his design is going to be fairly simple, fairly straightforward. The only thing you're really going to have to worry about in regards to drawing him is just getting the motion of his figure down. Whenever doing the posing for his, that's probably what you're going to be concentrating more on. Not necessarily just getting the definition of his muscles and whatnot, but you don't want to have him, like, just rigidly, you know, standing in, you know, like a sexy, I'm drinking Coca-Cola for a commercial sort of pose. You know, just pouring stuff all over his face. It's terrible drawing. Anyways, you get the idea. You want to concentrate on motion with him. Just taking a look at him, that's probably what we're going to be concentrating on. The definition of his face, he's a very angular design, even like with these drawings. And I'm not going to try to emulate any of these styles outright, because there's so much variation between all of them. But even with his muscles, like, they always draw them very angularly, with a lot of hard definition between lights and darks, and just trying to give him as much of this kind of sunui, sexy, you know, kind of wild ferocity that is very synonymous with him. The ogre, I don't know anything about the ogre other than he's a big weirdo. Makes sense. Not much to go on with him other than he's... All the images I could find of him were basically just the same thing. I guess because Tekken is such a popular franchise. It's going places these days. That's my topical humor. But he's a very simple design, which he's going to combine very well with Blanka, just because there's not a whole lot going on between the two of them. And they're very, very similar in so many ways. which Wooly kind of nailed it with all these guys. They all look very, very similar to one another in their own ways, and it's going to be pretty easy to shove them all together. But they're just different enough, and primarily in personality, I think, that it's going to create a bit of variation. He does not have the sort of hyper-angular kind of stuff going on that Blanka does, so we're not going to be able to rely on that too much. He's very more of a flowing character. Like even his poses are very kind of almost regal in some ways, and his hair does not have that spiky nonsense going on. It's just very flowing, very, again, sexy in its own way. And all the rest of his design is just going to be this armor. It's not even really armor, just, this regalia that he's wearing all over his body. And, of course, big pubic hair going on under the belt. Everything's pubic hair. You heard me. So, in regards to him, he's going to be very easy to combine with both of these guys. But these two there might be a little bit of problem between the two of those. It remains to be seen. Kotal Kahn, I think he's a fairly recent character. I don't think he's a remake or anything like that. He may be, though. I don't really know much about fighting games. What the hell am I talking about? But his design, obviously, there are some designs where, his outfit, he doesn't actually have like a mask on or anything. And I wanted to make sure that I actually had at least one reference material for that, because if I decide to not include a mask or anything with Blanka, whenever we fuse those together as such, then I won't have to. But the gist of his design, he, again, since all these are rendered to be as realistic as possible, I would say that he's probably the weakest in terms of focusing heavily on, like, a single sort of pose, because he does kind of drift between the two of them. He's very regal, but at the same time, he's also very visceral. If you've seen any of his gameplay videos, then, it's Mortal Kombat. What do you expect, right? But in terms of his actual design, the only thing we're really going to have to worry about too much is just the fact that keeping the chest exposed, focusing more on, I guess, if anything, the rigidity of just his masculine frame. Like, making sure that his shoulders stay wide, and making sure that we focus a lot on kind of these major points of non-articulation. His armor, very flowing, not much concentration on facial features, once again, very similar to our friend Ogre down here. So Blanka is probably going to be the one that's going to be contributing the most in terms of fusing these guys together and changing the elements of their personality. In terms of personality, of course I don't know as far as stories and everything go, but just from visual designs anyways, the personalities of these two are very similar, so they're going to mesh fairly well in that respect. Actually, fusing these two together may result in a guy that's almost completely indistinguishable, just because they are so similar in so many ways. If we're not careful, we could actually end up with someone that looks kind of like just him wearing his hat or something like that. So that's something to keep in mind in the future. But that's about it. Just be sure to concentrate anytime that you're looking over characters for these sort of fusion ideas if you're doing them on your own, which they're still fairly popular, apparently. Again, just keep in mind the sort of angularity of strokes, whether things are going to be curved or not, whether they're going to focus more on kind of soft features versus hard features, things like that. What you're going to be focusing on more is personality versus details. But details are also very important too. So personality comes first, and then details, and then you can worry about all the stuff that falls in line with that. So, now that we've established these little traits, let's go ahead and get started, shall we? Because I want to go stream on Picardo. Bye! Okay, very exhausted right now, but let's just... Whew, let's do that. Let's push right on through, shall we? Okay, first off, the thing that you want to do first off is just try to get a feel for what exactly their personalities are like. With a combination of Kahn here and Blanka, I decided the best thing to do is to find these two similar poses, and to just try to combine their basic ideas. These two are very similar, so I decided, well, if I'm going to find a happy medium between the two of them, finding a happy medium between the two poses that already exist would probably be a good way of doing it. So, the very first, even though I'm drawing out all the little details and things here, at this point, it's really not that important. I'm mainly just doing it so that I know absolutely what it is that I'm looking at. You don't have to do stuff like this. It's not that important at this stage. But of course, not all of this is drawn. So later on, I was actually working in stream on Picardo at the time, and I managed to. Someone managed to find a couple of images of the statues, the models that were made for the release of Mortal Kombat 5, and I based the feat off of that. But for the time being, I didn't. Yeah, see there. For the time being, I did not have them on hand. Here, obviously, they're not going to match up perfectly, so what I'm doing is just... This is normally just how I work. I overlay things behind what I'm working on, so I can just freely look at them while I'm drawing right on top of it. And what I'm doing here is just going through, not worrying about clothing, drawing them naked, not worrying about anything like that, and just drawing little bitty elements, kind of moving them around, and just focusing on each individual little body segment. You know, head, neck, chest, the general kind of waist area, forearms, and so on. Feel free to make some fairly big mistakes here. If you know, don't worry about it too much. The more important thing in this stage is just trying to get a feel for the personality of the subject. And in this case, it's kind of difficult to try to make it look both fierce and regal at the same time. Because like Past Me was saying, Kotal Kahn kind of has that element within his personality. You know, he's fierce and he's royal, regal, that sort of thing at the same time. So while that does combine well with both Blanka and Ogre, it can present a bit of a problem in the sense that how do you establish that he's both of those things at the same exact time? And thankfully, since I am combining it with Blanka, he does need to look a little bit fierce anyway, so I really didn't worry too much about that. And here I'm going back over and just trying to pick out little individual elements of both of their main character traits. With Blanka, he doesn't wear anything except for cute little short shorts, his slave anklets, and I think that's it. I think that's it with Blanka. He just has that plus hair, and that's all I have to really worry about. Which is kind of nice, but at the same time, it does present a bit of a problem. And here you can see if I did not add that loincloth, it would look like really sexy tiny shorts. And while that's sort of appealing in a way, it probably would not suit the design particularly well. So we'll just bring that loincloth over, shall we? Kind of, again, as I've said in past Fusion videos, one of the main problems with trying to bring over existing details from one character design and fusing it with another character design in which that other one doesn't have anything. Like, for example, Blanka has nothing as far as gloves go. Like, as far as his torso up, he has nothing. Like, it's just his body hair, and then that's it. Unfortunately, Kahn has, like, the big helmet that goes all the way down his shoulders, and he has the gauntlets. So how exactly do you get away with that? The way that I handled it was I decided, first for the gauntlets, to just make them a little bit shorter. And to kind of reduce the detail a little bit so that it looks kind of less, I don't know, saturated as far as details go. Obviously, put the little chest hair thing there. As far as the back end of his helmet, I'm obviously getting rid of all those little bitty feathers and just adding the Blanka hair to the back of it. As far as his actual mask goes, I noticed that putting that little hooked beak on the top of his helmet was making it look a little bit too Kahnish. So I got rid of that entirely and ensured that it was just joining down to that bottom segment. See, that little bottom segment, that makes no sense at all. As soon as you get rid of the top of the helmet, the bottom of the helmet makes no sense. So what I eventually decided was to just make that a bone. The bottom of a jawbone. Now, neither one of those actually has that, but Kotal Kahn does have bones within the elements of his existing design. And that does seem like something that Blanka may kind of do. And I briefly went over the Google search to make sure that I knew exactly what a bottom jawbone looks like. Other than that, I just gave him the little pointy ears, and that's kind of all I did as far as trying to unify both of the designs. With with the way that his helmet kind of goes all the way down to the shoulders and whatnot, I decided again that the easiest way to work around that is to just um, shorten it up a little bit. Just focus less on the details. That way, even though Blanka doesn't have that design, I'm at least not carrying it over completely. Which is kind of a cheap way of handling it, but it's probably the most efficient way of dealing with it. Because you don't want to just start making up things for the character. You want to avoid that completely when at all possible. Something that a lot of people, of course, make the mistake of doing in these fusion videos, or not fusion, but the general idea of fusing two characters together, is that they will just start putting things that they like onto the image. Like, even though they aren't traits that either one of the characters have, they may decide, well, like, for example, if one character is blue and one character is green, they may suddenly decide, you know what, now they're red for some reason, or they're yellow. Which will sort of is a lesson that will come up later in a bit. But you don't want to do that because then you're not staying true to the elements of the prior designs. Kind of one of the frustrating things for this kind of project for some artists is that they don't have much leadway. Like, this is more of an exercise, as I've said in the past, of trying to get both characters' very core elements down to the point that even when combined, you can look at it and say, that looks like so-and-so and so-and-so. And during the course of this, actually, I was streaming most of this on Picardo, as I said, and lots of people kept coming in wondering what I was doing and saying, hey, is that Blanka, or hey, is that Kotal Kahn? And, you know, they had no idea what I was even working on. So that's probably a good indication that what I was doing was correct. That they could actually look at this character and decide, oh, well, most people actually came in and said, oh, is that Wooly? Because, ha ha ha, two best friends, Zaibatsu, humor, so intelligent. But that's a good sign that people were actually able to come in and immediately see what was going on. And here I actually went over the same primary twice, accidentally, but that's okay. And once I got all that done, I started playing with different ways of applying line strokes. I didn't want it to be overly dark, but at the same time, I didn't want to go straight... I didn't want to use binary. That's not really fitting for the original painterly style of the Street Fighter art, and it's certainly not fitting for Kotal Kahn's Mortal Kombat. Just straight up, it's just a render. Like, it's not an actual painting or concept art or anything. It's just straight up a render. So what I started doing here, and I remember and fix this in a second, is I start drawing to one layer the straight up lines, and eventually I realize, oh, I should be containing these to their own layer so I can change their colors later. So I start drawing like a skin line layer, a bone line layer, hair, just anything that I know is going to have its own distinct color. That way, later on, once we actually start applying those colors, we can go back to these original line layers, preserve their opacity, and then recolor them to whatever it is that matches that. That is, if the skin ends up being green, we can take the skin line work and just kind of color that sort of a very dark green. Maybe a little bit of red, maybe a little bit of yellow, whatever looks good as far as your color theory goes. And here I am fixing all that. I think I do make a couple of errors as far as the organization of all the line work and everything, but it's not an immense deal or anything. You can always feel free to fix these things in post. As far as actually drawing line work, as I have said many times in the past, I feel most comfortable with my line work as far as that goes. I've never really cared too much for the way that I paint, though. Really, I would probably do much better in Photoshop, but it's it's intensive enough as far as the way that I work in terms of using various layers, and I had so little time this time that I didn't want to do anything overly risky as far as this video goes. So I ended up just sticking with Psy for the duration of this entire project, unfortunately. I really did want to try something new, but I just didn't have the time, unfortunately. But as far as the line work goes, you may find in Paint Tool Psy, I can't remember about Photoshop, But in Paint Tool Psi, and I use Paint Tool Psi because Psi is much better for line work than Photoshop is. Photoshop is not very cooperative when it comes to establishing clear dichotomies of black and white. It likes to blend things because that's how editing photos works. You know, you want it to do that as far as its primary purpose in editing photos. But as far as line work goes, does not work particularly great. So I'm using Paint Tool Psi because it does that much, much better, which does hamper it as far as coloring goes, which you'll see in a bit. But in terms of Paint Tool Psi, you'll notice up in the kind of middle of the screen, where I'm drawing right now, look straight up, and you will see Stabilizer. And that Stabilizer is very useful. I used to work without one at all, because I didn't really like the program kind of forcing my hand in certain directions and whatnot. But the idea with the Stabilizer is that since you are not drawing on paper, then since it's digital, it's not going to be very cooperative as far as following your exact gestures. So just having that on will go a long way towards ensuring that straight lines stay straight instead of wobbling a little bit. And, you know, just like curved strokes and so on don't get a little bit wobbly or aim in the wrong direction or things like that. And in other words, the more control you have over your hand, the less you have to worry about the program interfering with that. So that should be useful for a lot of you. And I would love to think that most people would know this, but I am not drawing with a mouse. Don't ask questions about whether I'm drawing with a mouse or not. Of course I'm not. There's no possible way. I actually used to draw with a mouse. That did not work out particularly well. That was not a good idea. But at the time, it was the only option that I had because I really couldn't afford a Wacom or anything. But I eventually splurged on a little $99 Wacom very early on. And I still have it, actually. It's still usable. But just get one of those if you possibly can. Because it's much better to try to learn on one of those than it is to work on a mouse. Working with a mouse is really not going to teach you a whole lot. You're probably just wasting most of your time. I like the way that the hands turned out. It is very difficult to work with hands just because of the way that all of it folds and everything. But thankfully with this goes for animation too. This is one of those universal art lessons. Is that the more character something has, the more intensity something has, the more action something has, and so on, that kind of idea, the easier it is to exaggerate details. Like a real hand is not going to look like that. I can tense my hand to kind of have the same folds and action going on that this thing is doing, but it's really painful. It doesn't feel particularly good. But just because, you know, we're basing this off Blanka and Kotal Kahn, it is much easier to work with and is more forgiving when exaggerating major details, which is what I'm doing with, say, the way that the toes kind of fold in or a little bit more angular than they normally would be, and the way that the hands are very, very muscular looking, even though they would never be like that in real life. And of course, I'm not saying that these hands are perfect or anything like that, but did a fairly good job on it, I think. And before me from like 10 years from now looks back on this video and just shakes his head in shame or something. Screw that guy. He doesn't know what he's talking about. It's me. I'm the young person. I know everything. But yeah, that's the general idea with that as far as line theory goes. And of course, don't start drawing and think, oh, it doesn't look like his, because obviously it's not. There's plenty of people that I would love to be able to emulate their line work, or their primary work, or, you know, anything like that, just something. But even if I know the exact kind of brush settings that they have and the exact gesture that they have, it's never going to be exactly the same. Don't worry too much about emulating what I'm doing or emulating what anyone else is doing. Just get a rough idea of how exactly I'm applying my strokes and just know that that sort of thing exists. So if you want to use that in how you're drawing, then, you know, go ahead. But if you don't want to use that, then, you know, you don't have to. And I'll reiterate this for this video, but normally how I do strokes is, and this is a tradition. I learned traditional, not digital. And of course, I've said in the past that people that learn digital tend to do one stroke, single stroke method. And I do that whenever I'm making very large strokes, like you see whenever I just drew the little slave anklet thing down there. Since that's one very large curved line, it is better to do a single stroke from that. And that's what the stabilizer is for. Stabilizer really helps with that. If you have no stabilizer at all, then you're going to get a lot of wobble to it, and it's just not going to cooperate at all. Coincidentally, also Toon Boom, if you're working in Toon Boom, and I'm pretty sure that Adobe Flash also has this these days, although it may be incorrect. Also has its own kind of stabilizer. I don't think it's called stabilizer, though. I think it's called smoothing, actually, in Toon Boom. But that's kind of the same idea. Is it helps the line to maintain its arc, its original arc. The program is looking at the kind of stroke that you're creating and then guessing, well, he wants it to do this evenly without it having too much variation. But if you actually do want to have a line that has a single stroke to have a lot of variation, then you're going to have to turn that down. Or else the program is going to try to auto-fix it, and that's not what you want. But otherwise, as far as my normal stroke method goes, I usually do very short strokes, which again is a traditional method, where you're just kind of loosely making very small, light strokes over one another over and over again until you get the exact kind of shape that you want. I've had some videos where I work in binary layer, which is it's an option in Paint Tool side for the layer options, in which it just turns everything to either black or nothing. Like, it's just complete black. There's no aliasing. Like, there's no blur on the edges to make things look more even when it's applied to things that are behind it and so on. Wait, what was I saying? It doesn't matter. But whenever you're working in, say, binary or something, then that can be a little bit too harsh. Whenever you're working like this, you can't really do short stroke. That's what I was trying to say. You can't really do short stroke method in binary exactly. That's another kind of example of you probably want to go digital. Because, like I said, since you don't have any aliasing on the edges, then it's not going to blur particularly well. You're going to see every single last little bitty error as far as the stroke method goes. So this little short stroke method is very good for raster, and of course applying it to paper in real life, but not particularly great for anything else, as far as digital work goes. And the reason why I pasted that over and erased most of it was just so that I could see the exact length and everything of the feathers. Even though that one of these feet is actually a little bit in the foreground and the other is a little bit in the background, but it's not that big of a deal. I don't think I ended up shrinking these feathers or anything, but it's not a colossal thing. The only thing that I can really say that I kind of cheated on as far as the unity both of these designs go is probably the little bitty band that's around his ankles right there. That you can see that's kind of supporting the feathers that's coming out of his little slave bracer thing. I made that slope down because it did not look right sitting directly on top. And here I am. I noticed that there's a little bit too much variation line strength, so I ended up copying the existing line work and putting it on top of itself. And then erasing down whatever was a little bit that didn't really need to be there. One of the disadvantages to working completely in raster and focusing a lot on getting things to blend across the edges of the line is, and this comes up later on whenever I'm coloring, is that even though the line looks black, and right now all these do look completely black, the stroke was soft enough on some of these edges that whenever I color them a different color other than complete total black, you know, no saturation or anything, then it does pick up enough on the lack of opacity within the stroke that you just made that it will actually bleed a little bit, and you'll be able to see it whenever you paint under it, whenever you're going across different layers. So for that reason, that's one of the reasons why you want to work at a very high resolution. I've said this again many times in the past, but it's worth reiterating in every single video. Don't work at the resolution that you're trying to export to. It doesn't matter if you're making a logo, it doesn't matter if you're doing a drawing, it doesn't matter if you're designing a sign or whatever. Always make sure, like, say, if you're trying to export something that's, you know, like a desktop wallpaper, like 1920 by 1080. Let's say you're making a 1920 1080 image. Start at 1920 1080 as far as your canvas goes, and then blow that up to, like, just add a 5 in replacing, like, the 1 in 1980. Replace that with, like, a 5 or something, so it's 5980. or replace it with a 6 or something. Just blow it up to like 4 or 5 times the size that it actually will end up being on export. And then once you do that, whenever you are reducing the size, then those little things that I was talking about, like the opacity errors and the very small strokes, overlapping too much with the layering, most of that will just go away. Like, you won't even notice it. Because you work so large that whenever you're reducing it, obviously the program is going to reduce all those raster little values into tiny little bitty pixels that you won't notice anyways. So that's the reason why people do that. Oh. What I'm doing here, of course, is, and this is just how I work, is I'm going through and just zoning off all the major color sections so that I can very, very easily edit the color that I want them to be. This is pretty important for a Trifusion, just because just combining the colors is so important. Like, say their hair, for example. Blanka obviously has very orange hair. It kind of is a little bit red in some ways, like it doesn't stray too far over into the yellows. And Kotal Kahn doesn't really expose his hair too much, but in the little bit that I've seen, he has black hair, like it's just pitch black. And I think that might shift a little bit over into the blue hue, if it has any saturation whatsoever. So whenever I was coloring his hair, I might start with an orange or a red or something. But if you were like working to one layer, like just doing a straight up painting, then it may look better, it may look more painterly, but you don't know exactly what that color is going to be. So if you decide, oh, it shouldn't have been red, it should have been, what I did here, which is more of an off-hue, light, orange, kind of brownish kind of saturation shade, then you can't really do anything about it at that point if you're working to one layer. Whereas if you do zone all your colors off, then it's very, very easy to just bring up the saturation menu, like Control U or Apple U or whatever you Mac people do. And that'll allow you to just shift over the saturation levels to whatever you want them to be. And I do that quite a number of times during the course of this particular video. And I think, unfortunately, the majority of the rest of this video is going to be me trying to desperately fighting Psy, trying to color things in the right way. And, of course, whenever you saw me coloring his teeth red for a second, that's not because I considered making his teeth red. It's because his teeth obviously are going to be white, but I'm working on a white canvas, so I can't see what I'm doing. So I, like working like a bright green or a blue or red or whatever, and then you just change it back down to a white after you know exactly where all your colors are and that everything's filled in the way that it should be. And here I kind of just try to finalize, for at least the time being anyways, all the major color components to make sure that they're kind of in the place that I want them to be. Just keep in mind that all of these are going to change, every last single one of them. Like, you think it looks okay now, and it would before you start shading it, but once you start shading, then all the color theory is going to change a little bit, and you'll need to shift those over a little bit. Of course, people that work to one layer handle that in different ways, which we won't worry about this particular video, but for the sake of this one, the easiest thing to do is just kind of just take it one step at a time. Just go through tiers, like line work, then color, zoning, and then going on to shading, and then after that, just kind of gradually adjusting things over time. And here, what I've been doing here is just going through, preserving the opacity of each little line area, and recoloring them to match the surrounding color zones. So the armor, is obviously kind of this orange, goldish bronze color. I painted back over that with sort of a light red, or, an orange or a yellow, whatever looks best to you, and then shifting its color a little bit to the point that I want it to be. Same with the feathers, same with, with everything else. The most problematic of these lines is probably going to be the skin. And I think out of everything that I painted on this image, the most problem that I had was the skin. And there's a lot of reasons for that. One is because, of course, we're used to looking at our own skin, so it's very easy to spot errors. Oh, and sorry, I jumped ahead. I forgot to record some of this where I was drawing these little lines. I did draw these in binary. And unfortunately, you won't be able to see that. But I drew these in binary, and then merged them down to an existing normal layer to ensure that they stayed pure raster. Which, binary doesn't work in vector or anything, but, it's just kind of weird like that. In other words, to get rid of the algorithm that the program is using to ensure that it's complete binary. And there's reasons for that, but that's a long-winded explanation. But of course, I just put the tattoos there because some people were saying, oh, it looks a little bit too like Blanka now. So I decided, well, there is one element that I didn't carry over that I forgot about, and that was the tattoos. So I went back and made sure that I carried those back over, and it took forever to figure out exactly what his look like, because you can barely see them without going straight over to the statue. And someone pointed out that he has these dumb little nose piercing things that stick out, and they look pretty stupid to me. But he has them, so you have to carry them over, whether you like it or not. This is part of fusing characters together. It doesn't matter if you like that Princess Peach's hair is yellow. If you're fusing her with another character, like if you're fusing her with Rosalina, then guess what? They're going to have yellow hair, whether you like it or not. Maybe you want them to have red hair. Maybe they would look better with red hair, or blue hair, or something. But you don't get a choice in the matter. You most certainly do not. Okay, now becomes the most tiring part of this. I'm doing a little bit of minor color shifting, but now begins the long, arduous process of trying to shade everything down. Which is very, very tiring. You can hear it in my voice. Like, it's not just because I've been talking so much, but shading is very tiring. Especially if you really don't like what you're doing. Like I was saying, skin is very difficult to shade because it's so easy to spot minor problems. And a lot of it is because, and again, this is a Photoshop thing, a lot of it relies very heavily on textures. Like a lot of people that draw these super hyper-realistic looking paintings, and I have these long pauses, by the way, because I'm talking with people on Picardo and stuff. Or I'm watching DS9 as they watch DS9 or something. But in Photoshop, a lot of artists rely very heavily on textures. And that goes a long way because textures already have immense amounts of detail. And here I was playing with the idea of actually trying to use textures. But texturing in Paint Tool Sci, it does not work very well. And that is because in Paint Tool Sci, even if you are applying a texture to a brush, which it does have that ability, even if you are doing that, then the way Paint Tool Sci handles it is it just kind of applies that texture all across the entire screen. Like, across the whole screen, but you don't see it until you start applying the brush, at which point it kind of removes the mask over that texture, if this is making any sense, so that you can see what's under it. Unlike Photoshop, Photoshop is actually tries to work the same way that a brush does. Like if you have a brush texture, it's actually going to behave like a brush. Whereas in Paint Tool Sci, it's doing, like right now I'm painting without a texture, and you can obviously see it because it's just solid color and nothing else. There's no variation at all. Paint Tool Sci does that, except during the course of doing little textures, this is the thing I really should have shown in LiveCom. During the course of doing those little bitty textures, then it just shows whatever is under it as far as Paint Tool Sci is concerned. And that one little vein is always very visible. I was playing with the idea of going a little bit more detail-oriented, but I realized Paint Tool Sci is just not going to have it. Again, this is something I really, as far as the shading goes, is really something I should have been doing in Photoshop, but I did not have the time to, because I haven't done this too often in Photoshop. I didn't really have the time to worry too much about it. But here I'm just going through and kind of just establishing a, like you'll notice here that I go across with the pencil, the pencil tool that I have set up, which is just straight up just solid colors. Like it almost has no aliasing at all. And then I establish kind of the basic zones that I'm working with as far as shading goes. And then I go back over with my blending tool and just hit the edges and try to make sure that it blends correctly. If you're painting or working with charcoal or whatever, any kind of shading at all, then it's kind of the same idea. You establish your lights and your darks, and then you start pulling the darks into your grayscale, your medians, and you just kind of keep working them together until it looks the way that you want them to work. I think actually, if I had more time, I probably would have spent way more time trying to get this shading right, because even in the final result that we're going to see in probably the next 2 hours, now the video's not that long, I still really was not overly fond with it. And I've said this in the past videos too, but whenever you're working with any sort of a final shading result, you want to have strong contrast of some kinds. Since this is a Trifusion, you don't want to have strong whites. Like, strong whites look really good. Like, it looks really good to have a white canvas in which, like, one half of a character's face is nothing but white, with just a little bit of detail in it. That looks really dramatic. But you can't see any details whatsoever, so for the sake of these fusion videos, I'm never going to do that. Even though it probably would look way better. So kind of the downside of that is that since I'm not working with strong lighting, or strong darks for that matter, like I can't make things completely black. Like say I can make one side of his rib cage completely black, and one side of his whole torso that's nothing but black, to where you could only see like one half of his body. That would look really dramatic. Like I'm trying the whites right now, and I just know that it's not going to work. Because it's not blending well with this green skin that he has. And I think a lot of it, like peach-colored skin, blends super, super well with this white and white canvas. Because it's so close to that on as far as saturation levels and light goes anyways. So you don't have to worry too much about it. Someone would say darker colored skin, you know, someone of African descent or Indian descent, or, you know, something like that. Not that they all have dark skin, but you get the idea. Someone like that, they can be a little bit more difficult to blend in that same way, but it's not that bad, because then you kind of focus more on the darks to create contrast, rather than focusing too much on trying to blend their skin into a white canvas or something. Although you can do that, and it does look nice whenever you pull it off. But it is very difficult to do. So if you find that you are struggling a whole lot to get skin to blend efficiently, that's why, and don't feel too bad about it, because that shit is fucking hard. A lot of the... Like, I'm doing all these things, and I'm not doing it anywhere near perfectly. Like I said, I feel strongest about my line work, then after that, like, the blending and everything, I'm just not super great at it, because I don't do it that often. But even with... you know, what little I know, you know, it's still very, very difficult. And even with my line work, there's lots of things about my line work that I wish could be a little bit better, because it's just super difficult. So don't worry too much about that if you're not getting it just the way that you want to. It's just a matter of experience. The more that you do it, the more that you learn from other people, the more it's going to be a little bit easier. One thing that I was trying to focus on doing, and this is strongest with that knee right there, is his right. The left that we're looking at, his right, where that kind of light hits the dark right below his knee and makes it look a little bit sharp. I was trying to get that effect on more areas of his body, but so much of it was already two-dimensional that it was really hard to pull off. The nice thing about that one knee is just because it's facing towards the viewer, that it's a little bit easier to make it a little bit more angular looking. Again, if I just had more time. But you can see me playing with all the color variations of the shading. Like, I decided on this method of shading, of creating one multiplier layer that is kind of a light, kind of, or not light, but it's just barely dark. Like, it's just enough to create a little bit of variation. And here I start on number 2, the second shading layer. And this is not the right or wrong way to do it. It's just how I decided to do it. And with the second one, I decided this was going to be the one that had that created more contrast. And I would keep this further away from the light source, and not use it whatsoever near the light source. Like here, I'm just working completely on one side of his body and nothing else. And anything that I think like the light is going to be hitting, then I avoid completely. And kind of an advantage with this, and none of this is good for realism, by the way. But kind of the good thing about this is that you can control the saturation levels and the hue of each shading layer on its own, and kind of create sort of a blue hue for the shadows on one side, and then on the other side focus more on it being a warmer color like orange or something. It gets really super complicated. It gets very complicated. So if none of that makes any sense to you, do not worry about it. Because as I said, even I'm not getting this shit right. That's for sure. But I probably should have started on something else besides skin first. Because I feel like the skin ends up looking the worst out of all the areas that I shaded. And it's always good to start with something simple. Whenever you start drawing lines, or whether you start shading something, or anything that you know is going to be kind of complicated, start with the thing that you're most confident in. Like something it's barely going to take any time at all. Because then, even if you screw it up, then you can just go back and just redo it, and it's not going to take any time whatsoever. Plus, like if you're trying for a unique kind of stroke method, like a lot of people will start with the face, and they'll start doing these very small, thin line strokes, and then they find themselves working faster and faster, not changing the line thickness that much, and they will end up with the body having a lot of very thick lines and looking kind of cartoony, and the face looking very, very thin as far as the line variation goes. And that creates a lot of problems, because then you have to go back over and try to fix the uniformity of the line thickness across the whole image. Whereas if you had just started with something simpler, like drawing some little tiny detail or something, then you would have kind of gotten into your rhythm sooner and not had to worry about it. And here I finally got out of the skin and started with the hair. That chest hair was a big problem because it didn't really... its color contrasts with the skin tone so much. But as far as if ignoring that, his actual hair coming off the back of his head, I think that did look pretty good. It's pretty fun to get hair, especially if you're just working in a minimalist cartoony style, which this is kind of my style. I don't really do realism, but I don't really focus too much on things looking kind of cartoony at the same time. I kind of am in the middle, I guess, which can look good or bad depending on what your preferences are. But it's always fun to do the hair, because it's both fast, and hair is already kind of, hair just is a bunch of strands anyways. So you don't have to worry too much about the details being accurate. This is one of those things. Kind of fun to do. Some people hate hair, but if you just focus on just trying to make it, don't focus too much on the strands and just individual kind of, Akira Toriyama, just line segments of just big triangles like I do there, right there. And it looks fine. Kind of that anime shading, I guess, is the way of looking at it. Is much, much easier. But things like this fur, for example, that's kind of a problem. I don't know if I really got this just right. But you get the idea of how I'm doing it. I go over one layer, one multiply layer, and that occupies the most space. And the second one occupies a little bit less space, but it's darker. So you end up with a little bit more variation as far as lighting goes. Oh, and I never explained this about the lighting, but what I'm doing is, as far as paint tool SI goes, Photoshop is going to have way more options. But as far as SI goes, its overlay layer option does not work very well. It's not very intense. It's not really ambitious enough, I guess. Whereas in Photoshop, it's kind of more dramatic, and it's a little bit easier to blend into things, and it's easier to use overlay itself. These bones, by the way, this kind of bone, because of its high saturation, high lightness value, makes it a little bit difficult to shade and work correct values into. I was focusing too much on detail, trying like right there on the side, and eventually I decided, I'm just going to go straight up hard shadows, and I just got rid of most of the light value in that. Anyways, as far as the light value in creating the kind of lighting effects on the side of like the skin and the little fur sections and so on, I am using Luminosity as far as paint tool SI goes. In contrast, Luminosity in Photoshop is a little bit too strong. Because Luminosity in Photoshop tends to make things absolute whites, or it did in the last version that I worked with anyways. So I tend to not use it in Photoshop, and in Sai it works a little bit better. It works a little bit closer to what Overlay does in Photoshop. But, you know, you can see what exactly, like, if you put white on an overlay value on top of, like, skin, it'll make it look like a regular peach-colored skin or something. It'll make it look kind of yellow. Whereas if you use Luminosity, it makes it look white, because it's trying to make things luminescent. Whereas in Paint Tool Sai, an overlay in Paint Tool Sai does almost nothing. It kind of just, it makes it look like there's like a sheet of paper or something sitting on top of it. It doesn't look good at all. Like, some colors it looks okay, but a lot of the times it kind of just looks kind of cruddy. Which is why that you really don't really have many blending options. You just end up having to use Luminosity exclusively, even though I really don't like that. And that's one of the reasons why Sai is not really that great for painting. Again, Sai, great for line work, but not particularly great for actually coloring things. Although it does produce some very vivid coloration. Like, that's one of the things that people say about my work. Like, it usually is very saturated and has a lot of interesting visual dynamics because of that saturation level all over the place. But it can look very jarring, and some people don't like it. So if you, like, if you're going to focus on painting, you probably should be working in Photoshop, or like, you know, Painter X or something like that. Whatever exactly version that Corel is on, or just any other program like that. Although those also had their own problems. But that's about it as far as basic method of what I'm doing. I'm just kind of finishing up all the little smaller irregular areas. So, of course, you want to be knowledgeable about the material that it's going to be. Like, sort of the bone material that I was working on. Bone is going to not really be smooth. Bone isn't going to be smooth exactly. It's going to have a lot of, like, tiny itty-bitty variations, but it's not really going to have a texture. Like, it's not going to be like you're drawing dragon scales or, you know, leather or something. It's just going to have a lot of very tiny variations, so you know, just the way that I shaded all of that, I was trying to do little kind of blobby individual strokes versus big long ones, or avoiding very tiny ones all over the place. Whereas with this leather, kind of leathery, kind of, I don't even know what exactly he's wearing, but it's kind of leathery looking in a way. I instead just tried to, of course, again, I was trying to avoid using textures because it's Paint Tool Sai, and Sai just is awful with textures. I was trying to focus more on giving it more of kind of a, I don't know, kind of a more organic feel to it, where it's kind of shifting a little bit by just focusing more on, not texture, but just how the form of it, like its surface is undulating just a little bit. It's kind of hard to pull off, but if you practice enough, you'll eventually get an idea of how it works. It's kind of hard to explain. I would have to physically demonstrate it, I guess. Which I guess I will in future videos. Because again, in each of these Trifusion series videos, I usually start out with live comm in different sections. This time, obviously, I did the live comm at the beginning, when I was just establishing things like character traits and so on. In the next one, I don't know when I'm going to where I'm going to be doing that, but it might be, you know, the shading section, it might be color zoning section or something like that. Who knows? But you'll see that in the future of this particular series. Wooly has actually already seen the finished product of this. He didn't say a single word about it. How rude! How absolutely rude of Wooly. But as far as be aware whenever you're working with luminosity on metal surfaces, because metal, your base lighting value is probably going to be pretty light in the first place. Like, it's going to be a high lightness value, high saturation value, gold or orange or something like that, like we're working in here. Or maybe like a blue or something, if you're focusing more on it being more of a modern steel metal. whenever you're working with your luminosity, if you're working that way, then just be aware that it's super easy to make it look overly dramatic. So what I usually do is I just add like one or two little bitty lines, or just have one line and then that's it. Because you can very easily overwork either shading or lighting for any text or anything. And in some ways, I guess I kind of do that every single time that I draw anything, but I can't resist. I just can't resist. But that's fine too. I guess that gives it a unique look, even if that unique look is probably not as great as it could have been if I just made it look a little bit more cartoony. But here I have finally finished everything as far as compiling all the elements together, getting everything shaded just the right way. Again, everything kind of looks more or less fine, except for the skin, I think. And I think a lot of that is just because those tattoos are there. The tattoos are kind of breaking up, especially the chest, and making it look like it's not shaded correctly just because they're overlaid on top of things. Again, if I had more time to play with it, I guess it probably wouldn't have looked... It probably would have looked a little bit better. And it probably would have looked a little bit better if I had just stuck with more of a cartoony look that had, like, no aliasing. That was just, like, simple tertiary colors. You know, just base color value, light, dark. No shading. No blending at all. Probably would have looked better. But if it's some butts for candy and nuts and so on and so forth. What I'm doing here is just kind of finalizing all the saturation and lightness values for all the line work. And kind of the same thing with the tattoos here, which is actually pretty difficult. And you'll notice that there's little bitty spaces. You may not be able to see it as far as the resolution of the videos. Little spaces in between the color and the line and so forth. Again, a lot of those will kind of just go away once it gets reduced in size, so it's not a big deal. So that's that. I tried to focus on it being kind of a light, like everything's kind of warm looking, because it's going to have, I would assume that there is like a fire in the distance or a sunset or who knows what the hell else. You know how much I love sunsets. And just trying to make sure that it's very kind of warm looking. Because like if your skin has a warm light value to it, then don't make like your metal have a cold one, because that doesn't make any sense. It has to be uniform. But you get the idea. Whew, man, this was already going... I know this is going to be a tiring series already. But hopefully Wooly will one day actually thank me for it, because he's just a cold, inhuman monster. You hear that, Wooly? But thank you guys for coming along. I think it looks more or less alright. If we're focusing less on the technique and more on the actual fusion of the character, then it looks pretty good. Some people in the chat were saying it looks too much like Blanka. Some people were saying it looks too much like Kotal Kahn. Again, as I've said in all of my Trifusion videos, that's a sign that you did it correctly. Because if people say, well, if you did that, blah, blah, because everyone has their own opinion about everything, you are never, if you're doing it correctly, you are never actually going to get the response of, this looks like a perfect blend of both characters. It is seamless in every way possible. You're not going to get that. You just aren't. Instead, you're probably going to get people saying it looks too much like one guy or it looks too much like another guy. And if you add even a single detail, like that beak helmet that I got rid of early, if I put that on top of him, he would instantly look just like Kotal Kahn. Except he would kind of look like he was wearing a little bit of Blanka's gear. Just a little bit. Or have kind of his color hair. And that was it. It would be too much. And if I removed like his helmet entirely or something, he would look almost exactly like Blanka. You know, this is one of those things. As far as the actual fusion of the characters go, it looks pretty good to me. If I had to do it all over again, it would probably look exactly the same. Although, obviously, the coloring and whatnot would probably be different. Line work also looked pretty good. I like the way that the line work turned out as well. Alright, but stay tuned for more in this series. I'm just going to carry this over into the next month. The thing that was supposed to be released last month, and last month, the month before that too, well, I'll just release that along with these things starting in July. And we won't have to worry about any of that. Which I don't know what I'm going to do for the month after that then, because that's going to raise a whole mess of other things to worry about. because I'm not done with that other line, the line thing I was working on. Oh, it's going to be a mess. It is going to be a mess, but that's something for future Eli to worry about. I will never have to worry about that. So, come by for next time. I will be working on an ogre. I don't know who it's going to be exactly. It's going to be either ogre plus Blanka or ogre plus Kotal Kahn in the future, and we'll worry about that then. I will see you guys next time.